this grand occasion, actually. Now, the organizers have kindly suggested that they should be projected onto the screen, and sorry, I hope you'll find them helpful. And of course, the correct title for my talk is a little bit longer than just the Jonghs. You'll see it's the Vicissitudes of an expat family, the Jonghs, 1812 to 1964. Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Willem Daniels, the great-great-grandson of the Dutchman John de Jong, who in 1812 settled in Smyrna, where he married my great-great-grandmother, Mary Wilkinson, an English woman born into a Levantine family of merchants and consuls, going back a couple of generations into the 18th century. My idea for this talk, though, is not to dwell on family pedigrees so much as to sketch the history of a Levantine lineage that strikes me as representational of the history of many Levantine or Smyrniot expat families in the period from the latter part of the 18th century till about the mid-1900s. And I'll highlight this story mostly with male members of the de Jong family. This gives me a somewhat uneasy feeling of visiting an injustice on the women, but I decided that for the purposes of this short talk, the traditional patrilineal approach might work best. In looking at Levantine families that settled in Smyrna between, say, the mid-18th century and about 1825, in particular British and perhaps Dutch ones, I've been impressed by the recurrence of a certain pattern in which the founder of the Smyrna line was drawn to the city by an opportunity which he pursued successfully enough to encourage him to settle there, often achieving a degree of success which later generations found difficult to replicate. I would speculate that the supply of niches for entrepreneurial or pioneering spirits didn't keep pace with the growth of the expat community during the course of the 19th century. Also, that the new arrivals were by definition men with a bent for bold initiative, an adventurous spirit, perhaps something of a buccaneering streak, not necessarily transmitted to their descendants. On the other hand, the expansion of established enterprises in Smyrna does seem to have generated plenty of suitable employment opportunities to go around, and it was thanks to these that the later generations mostly made quite a decent living. We also see, from about the middle of the 19th century on, the importation from the UK and elsewhere of more and more technical experts, managers, and the like for a specific purpose, such as building a projected railway or managing an existing factory. By the end of the 19th century, Smyrna had a well-developed modern capitalist economy with a considerable diversity of jobs and skills among the burgeoning expat community. And this meant that incomes and lifestyles between members of the same family were more and more likely to diverge. We certainly see all this reflected in the de Jonghs. The first Smyrna de Jong, John, was a 27-year-old Dutch merchant who apparently had been living and working in London when he arrived in Smyrna in 1812 to enter into partnership with Robert Wilkinson, the treasurer of the Levant Company and consul of Sweden in Denmark. Presumably he already knew Wilkinson, and in the same year he married Wilkinson's daughter Mary. Now here was a man who wasted no time. It wasn't quite plain sailing from that point on, however, as for some reason he had to wind up his partnership with Wilkinson in 1814, losing all his capital in the process. But he managed to bounce back, and by 1827 his business activities, most notably the operation of a cotton press factory, were so successful that he was appointed consul and ultimately consul general of Denmark. No, Denmark, not the Netherlands. And in 1840 he launched a newspaper, The Impartial, which was apparently another successful venture. So in John de Jongh, we see a prime example of a man who made his mark as a successful entrepreneur and first-generation Smyrniot. Many another Levantine lineage was launched with similar panache. Two of John and Mary's sons carried forward the de Jongh name, having allied themselves through marriage with two other British expat lineages, the Wilkins and the Barkers. The fact that this second generation possessed only two male lines meant that the de Jonghs got off to a fairly unprolific start in Smyrna, at least in terms of male lines, which of course are the ones that preserve the family name. Only two of John and Mary's daughters went on to have children as well, having married into the French Fontaine and the Dutch Van Lennep families, respectively. As far as we know, the two sons, John Robert and David, is there some way of making this progress? I'm afraid we've gotten stuck at the first, or should I say when it should go? I'm not sure. I'm supposed to press a button. Okay. What do I do? I